This lesson is about uh, resolving forces and its components. Before that, we need to define force. I have here the definition for a force. Any influence that causes motion and or deformation. So a force can be described as a push or a pull. Quantities can be classified as scalar quantity, which has magnitude only, and vector quantity, which has both magnitude and direction. Example to a vector quantity is the force. So the force is represented by an arrow. So the length of the arrow would describe and represent the magnitude of the force, how strong or how weak the force is, while the arrowhead will represent and specify the direction of the force, whether it is going to the right, to the left, upward, downward, or any other direction. So the force can be tensile force or compressive force. So to illustrate, I want you to observe this arrow, red arrow. So this red arrow has a certain length, and the length of the arrow would represent the magnitude of the force. So if this length is longer, it means that it has a greater force. And if this length is shorter, it means that it has a smaller force. So the direction of the arrow will describe where the force is going. So if it is going there, upward, going leftward, going downward, or any other direction for that matter. So for this next lesson, we need to uh, find the components of the force along its x and y direction. So we need to have the Cartesian coordinate system where we have here the x, the y, the negative x axis, and the negative y axis. So if the force is placed here, it means that the force is totally going to the positive x direction, and it doesn't have any component along the y direction. And if the force is going there, so it means that the force is purely going downward, and it doesn't have any x component along the x axis. Now what happens if the force, say, is going there with a certain angle here, theta? So what part of the force is going to the right side along the positive x-axis, and what part of this force is going upward along the positive y-axis? So if we are going to consider that this is the amount of the force, if this force is known as F, we are going to call this F sub x, where F sub x is the component of the force along the x-axis. So if we can solve that, it will be F cosine of theta, because that is the adjacent side. While this part of the force, which is going up, we are going to call that F sub y. How do we solve for F sub y? F sub y is equal to F sine theta. So these values here become positive because it is going to the right, and positive also because it is going upward. So this force can go from the first quadrant to the second quadrant, to the third quadrant, and to the fourth quadrant. So if it is in the second quadrant, it means that the x component is negative because it's going to the left, while the y component here will be positive. But if the force is located on the third quadrant, it means that the x component will be negative because it is going to the left, and also negative for the y component. And if the force is on the fourth quadrant, it means that the x component will be positive, while the downward component will be negative. Okay? So that is how to determine the components of the force along the x and y direction when the force is positioned at any quadrant. Thank you and good day.